Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right by Jane Mayer is an extraordinary piece of investigative journalism that uncovers how a small group of wealthy American families quietly reshaped U.S. politics over the past several decades. Mayer dives into the opaque networks of influence that have allowed billionaires to steer public policy, fund movements, and shape ideology, all while evading the scrutiny and accountability that typically come with political participation. Her work reads less like a dry exposé and more like a political thriller, filled with secrecy, manipulation, and power plays that altered the course of American democracy. At the heart of the story are Charles and David Koch, heirs to an oil fortune and architects of a sprawling political machine that has touched nearly every corner of conservative life. Mayer traces how the Koch brothers, motivated by a fierce libertarian ideology, set out to reduce government regulation and dismantle social programs they viewed as threats to individual freedom and free markets. But unlike typical political donors, the Koches did not simply fund campaigns, they built an entire ecosystem of think tanks, academic institutions, and advocacy groups to advance their vision of government. Mayer reveals that this network, which she calls the Kochtopus, was deliberately designed to disguise its political intent. Through layers of nonprofit foundations and 501(c)(4) organizations, billions of dollars could flow anonymously to support candidates, fund studies, and create media campaigns, all without public disclosure. What appeared as spontaneous grassroots movements were often carefully orchestrated efforts funded by these dark money sources. The result was a parallel political infrastructure that rivaled, and often outmatched, the Republican Party itself. The book explores how this machinery began influencing policy long before it gained national attention. Mayer details how, starting in the 1970s, conservative intellectuals and donors began targeting academia and public discourse. Institutions like the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, and the American Enterprise Institute were seeded with donor money to produce research favoring deregulation, tax cuts, and privatization. By investing in the language and legitimacy of scholarship, these billionaires reframed the ideological landscape so that their positions seemed like reasoned policy debates rather than self-serving economic agendas. As Mayer shows, this influence extended into the judicial system. Wealthy donors understood that courts could be a powerful instrument for enforcing their worldview, so they funded the creation of organizations like the Federalist Society to cultivate conservative legal minds. Over decades, this quiet, methodical effort helped shift the judiciary toward a philosophy that favors corporate power and limits the reach of government oversight. The culmination of this project can be seen in the modern Supreme Court's rulings on campaign finance and deregulation, many of which reflect the priorities of the dark money network. What makes dark money particularly compelling is that Mayer humanizes the people behind this machinery without reducing them to caricatures. She portrays the Koches and other donors, like the DeVos and Scaife families, as products of their upbringing and worldview, deeply convinced that their wealth entitles them to reshape society according to their principles. Yet their ideology often masks a more pragmatic pursuit of power, tax breaks, reduced regulation, and freedom from environmental and labor restrictions that would otherwise limit their business empires. The 2010 Citizens United Supreme Court decision becomes a turning point in Mayer's narrative. The ruling allowed corporations and unions to spend unlimited amounts of money in elections, effectively unleashing the dark money networks the Koches had been building for decades. Mayer documents how, in the aftermath, political spending by these billionaire-funded organizations exploded, influencing everything from local school board races to presidential campaigns. What had once been a quiet project of elite influence now operated in the open, reshaping the Republican Party into a vehicle for its donors' interests. Mayer's storytelling shines when she connects these vast structures of money and power to individual lives. She recounts how policies influenced by dark money donors, such as cuts to public services, attacks on unions, and resistance to climate change legislation, have real consequences for ordinary Americans. Behind every ideological battle over government spending or environmental regulation are families, workers, and communities bearing the costs of policies crafted to serve the wealthy few. She also brings in the stories of those who tried to resist or expose this shadowy influence. Mayer herself faced intimidation and smear campaigns after beginning her reporting, showing how the same forces that manipulate democracy also attempt to silence dissent. These moments underscore the stakes of her investigation, not just for politics, but for journalism and truth itself. Throughout the book, Mayer captures the moral and philosophical tension underlying the dark money phenomenon. The donors see themselves as champions of freedom, fighting against what they perceive as government overreach. Yet Mayer exposes the irony that their efforts to liberate the market have eroded the very foundations of democratic choice. When wealth determines which voices are heard, freedom becomes the privilege of the few rather than the right of all. The narrative also shows how dark money has reshaped the Republican Party's identity. What began as a coalition of social conservatives and fiscal hawks gradually became a movement defined by the priorities of its billionaire benefactors. Moderate voices were marginalized, and policies once considered extreme became mainstream doctrine. The Tea Party movement, often seen as a populist uprising, is revealed as one of the most successful dark money projects, carefully branded as grassroots while heavily financed by elite interests. Mayer doesn't stop at critique, she implicitly asks readers to consider what transparency and accountability might look like in an age of unlimited political spending. She points to reform efforts and investigative journalism as crucial counterweights to the secrecy of dark money networks. Yet her tone remains sobering. Once the machinery of influence is so deeply embedded, dismantling it requires more than outrage, it demands structural change and civic vigilance. Her prose combines the precision of a reporter with the tension of a novelist. The book moves seamlessly between high-level strategy meetings in billionaire boardrooms and the quiet academic offices where think tank economists craft talking points. Each chapter builds on the last to show not isolated scandals but a coherent strategy, to fundamentally alter how power works in America without ever facing the voters directly. By the final chapters, dark money reads as both a warning and a reckoning. Mayer's research reveals that the greatest threat to democracy may not come from demagogues or populist uprisings, but from well-funded elites who have mastered the art of influence behind the scenes. Their success has redefined what political participation means in the modern era, transforming it from a public act of citizenship into a private investment opportunity. Ultimately, Mayer's book leaves readers with a haunting realization: the machinery of dark money has changed not just policy but perception itself. When enough wealth can shape the very terms of political debate, citizens no longer argue over facts, but over realities constructed by those who can afford to fund them. Dark money is not just a chronicle of hidden influence, it is a map of how democracy, left unguarded, can be quietly bought and sold.